Hello everyone, welcome back to the second video tutorial for Module 10. We're going to begin with step 13. So I want everybody to make sure that they have selected earphone suppliers. And what we're going to do now is we're going to use Solver to analyze if it's going to be how cost effective it will be to outsource manufacturing of the personal earphones using these three suppliers. So before we start, I want you to take note of the numbers that you have here and your end result of what you want your cost to be. So for Prima Electronics, if you give them 3,300 units that they can produce at this cost, this is what your total cost will be. So when we use Solver, we're going to present some constraints and objectives to say, give me some different information of how I can use this information by divvying up the amounts that's most cost effective for me as the business owner. So we're going to begin with going to the Data tab on the ribbon, and you want to select Solver. And that will load the Solver Parameters dialog box. So according to the instructions, the first thing that we want to do is we want to set the objective as minimizing the value in cell 10, meaning we don't want anything to show us in solving this problem, anything that's going to go over the cost that we already have. So the set objective, we want to select cell E10. So I'm going to use the arrow and I'm going to select E10. So whatever scenarios come up with Solver, we don't want it to go over. That's our objective, and that's going to be the minimum amount. And how we want to get there is by changing some variable cells, and the cells that we want to change are found in B4 through D4. So we're going to click on the arrow again, and we're going to select B4 through D4, and select that box again to come back to the Solver Parameters dialog box. So the next thing that we want to do is we want to set some constraints up according to the instructions. So what the first constraint, so we're going to add a constraint, click on the add button, and the constraint dialog box will appear. So the first constraint that we want to set up is we want to make sure that cell E4, so I'm going to select the arrow, and I'm going to select E4, the total number of units produced is equal to, use the drop down arrow, select equal to 12,500. So by outsourcing this to these manufacturers, we don't want the units produced to exceed 12,500. So the next parameter that we want to do, so we're going to click on add to add another constraint. We want cell E10, so I can either use my arrow or I can select cell E10. We want it to be less than or equal to 1.2 million. Next, we want to add another constraint that's going to reference cells B through D4, and we want that to be less than or equal to 5,000, meaning we don't want one manufacturer to exceed 5,000 in attaining the goal of 12,500 units produced. Finally, we're going to add a final constraint that we want cells B4 through D4 to be an integer. So I select those cells, I select the drop down, select INT for integer, and click OK. So the Solver Parameters dialog box will reappear with everything that you've just put in there, all of your constraints, your objective, and your variable cells. So now what you want to do is you want to solve this problem. What do I need to do? What kind of mix-up do I have to have for these suppliers to achieve all of these goals and parameters? So you come to the Solver Parameters dialog box and click Solve. And the Solver Results dialog will appear, and we want to keep the Solver solution, so make sure that that is checked, and you want to return to the Solver Parameters dialog, so click inside that checkbox, and then you're going to click OK. And now we want to load it and save it. So when I click on load and save, it's going to ask me, where do I want to load the information? And according to the instructions, we want that to appear in cells A14 through A21. And then I click save. And I can close the solver parameters dialog box. So now you can see that there's been some changes here to show how I can mix up these three manufacturers to be most cost effective for my company. So now we're going to move on to step 14. And to do so, we're going to select the All Products tab. And what we're going to do here is we're going to create a scenario summary report. And it's going to summarize 3 different effects of what it means to remain at status quo if we were to subcontract or if we were to raise prices by 5%. So I'm going to we should already be on the Data tab, and we're going to come back to the What If analysis, and we're going to select Scenario Manager. And we want to select Summary. So it'll show you here the scenarios that are available: status quo, subcontract, and raise prices. And we're going to select Summary. And we want the results to appear in B through D17. And we're going to click OK. So now you can see that a new tab has been created, and it's providing a summary of what we would need to do for status quo if we were to subcontract out the work, or if we were to raise prices by 5%. So for step 15, we want to come back to the All Products tab. And what we're going to do is we're going to use Scenario Manager once again so that we can compare the profit per unit in each of the scenarios. So we are on the Data tab, and we want to come to the What If analysis. And we want to select Scenario Manager. And we want to edit. So for step 15, we want to make sure that we're back onto the All Products tab, and we're going to use the Scenario Manager once again to compare the profit per unit in each of the scenarios. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to create a scenario pivot table. And we're going to do that by going to the Data tab, What If Analysis, Scenario Manager, Summary, and we want to create a scenario pivot table report using cells B17 through D17. So now that those have been selected, you can click OK. And notice that a new tab has been created showing us this pivot table. So there are some things that we want to do here to make this look a little prettier. So we're going to do a little bit of formatting. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to remove this drop down here, this filter field. So to do so, I'm going to come over to the pivot table fields, and I'm going to look at my filters, and I'm going to select this one filter that I want to remove, and I'm going to click and drag it up to remove it. So the next thing that we want to do is we want to change the format of the profit per unit sold, noise canceling, and earphones. And we want this to appear as currency with 2 decimal places and the $sign. So we're going to come over, we're going to select cells B4 through D6, come over to the Home tab on the ribbon, In the number area, you're going to select the drop down and select currency. By default, it'll give you 2 decimal points and the $sign. Next, we're going to change the headings for these 3 cells. So the first we want to change to wireless, and then noise canceling, and finally earphones. Now we want to add a title to this pivot table, and we want to label it profit per unit sold. So you're going to type that in cell A1, and now we're going to format this by using the title cell style. So select cell A1, you should be on the Home tab, come over to the Styles area and click the drop down and find Title. Click it, and now you can see that that's been formatted using the title style. Finally, what we want to do is we want to format and resize column A using AutoFit. So to select the entire column, put your mouse cursor in cell A and double click when you see the arrow. So now that's been AutoFit so that profit per unit sold is not cut off. And then finally, for formatting, what we want to do is rows B through D, we want to resize to 15 points. So you simply click inside when you find your arrow and resize it to 15 to resize those columns. So finally, we're going to move on to the final step, which is step 16. And if you're using a Mac, the instructions are a little bit different, so you should refer to the instructions if you are using a Mac. So finally, what we want to do is we want to add a pivot chart to the scenario pivot table worksheet. So we're on the scenario pivot table worksheet, and we want to add a pivot table here, a chart. So the first thing that we want to do is, what do we want to chart out? We want to chart out cells A3 through D6. And we want to insert a chart. So once we've selected the area, we're going to select Insert, and we're going to come over to Charts. You can go to Recommended Charts. Column is where you want to go, and you want to make sure that you're on Clustered Column, and then click OK. So as you can see, now the chart appears here for you. So again, we're going to do a little bit of formatting to make this look a little prettier. So the first thing that we want to do is we want this chart to appear and reposition it to be in cell A8 through D20. So I'm going to click and drag over to A8, and then I'm going to use the resize to move over to D20 by clicking and dragging. So finally, we want to get rid of the field buttons that we see in values and all over here. So you can click on any single one of the field values and right click on any one of them and scroll down to hide all field buttons on the chart. When you click that, you notice that everything is now gone. So hopefully you're able to get through this exercise. I wish you luck. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Thank you.